I'm picking up here with the slide. We have explained the last pair volume index. When going on, we must spend a few words on price indices in practice. These are consumer price indices, for example, or the producer price indices, also service producer price indices, SPPIs. They are all as pair price indices and not the partial we actually need. I will come back to this a bit later. What price statisticians do is they define precise bundle of goods and services and obtain their value shares in the base year. And this is, of course, needed for the weighting, also for these indices. It must be taken care of different qualities of products. Qualities are determined by physical characteristics. For example, a red mobile phone is valued higher quality than a boring gray one or so. Or accompanying services determine the quality. For example, a business class seat has higher services than economy class seat in an airplane. Location can be important for the quality. If you buy some in the store in the city center or outside somewhere in the green. Also the timing, for example, the ice cream in summer might be valued a higher quality and a higher price than an ice cream in winter with -degrees. Price statistics have developed techniques to deal with quality changes of products. Just a few keywords here. There are the matched models, option pricing, overlapping techniques, expert judgments you need for unique products and big products, like, for example, ships that are only built once, or construction work structures which are unique, and there you must rely on expert judgments to estimate if there are changes in prices or changes in quality. Another method is the hedonics method, which is in particular used for technology products, for example, computers, where you try to decompose the price of a product, a computer, into its characteristics, and then determine the individual prices or the implicit prices for each of the characteristics of this product. And that way you can estimate changes in the quality determined by changes in determines the changes in the price. More details on this you can read in the references I give to you at the end of the session. And price statistics is, of course, a whole world in its own. Let's speak about the representativeness of weights. We said we use the last pair price index, but this uses the weights of the base period. And the older this base period is, the longer it is in the back, the past, the less representative, of course, the weights will be over time. And this can create a bias in the index. And this is, of course, a serious problem. On the other hand, the Parsha and the Fisher price index are more representative because they use more recent weights. But the problem, of course, is exactly this, that you must use current weights. And this is the challenge for timeliness. And in practice, it's not possible to have the weights of the current year when you actually want to calculate the indices. That's also why we went for the last pair price index, the last pair volume index, and also last pair price index in statistics. But there was an idea how to overcome this problem, or to limit this at least. And the idea was this chain. And this means that not a fixed base year is moved, but a moving base year is used. This means that you always use the weights of the previous year to calculate growth rates. So the base year is changing each year, and each year it's the previous year is your base year. That's why we also very often speak about calculation or aggregates in previous year's prices. Then you change the year-on-year growth rates together, and then you can obtain a constant price data, so time series of this in constant prices or with a fixed reference year. When you chain link, then this growth rate. There's also commission decision, which requires, of course, this last pair method. One big problem of this chain linking is that non-additivity will occur in this constant price series. One example is that when you remember, for example, the expenditure approach, you can calculate GDP as the sum of final consumption expenditure, gross capital formation plus export minus imports. This you can do in the base period, but when you then use chain linked indices and you you will not be able to do this then later on with your time series of these components. When you add them up, you will not get the GDP in this in volume terms because the additivity got lost. What is correct is the growth rate for each of these indices, but you must then, for each aggregate, you must individually calculate a chain-linked volume series. You cannot add them up later on to receive then the sum as you would have done it in the base period, where it was correct. This is, of course, a very unpleasant thing for analytics and for analysis. This chain linking, I'll show you now a little example to better understand it. We have here the years. In the first column, we have the volume index in previous year, where the previous year is always put to 100. So each time the previous year is 100. For 2011, we have 102.5. In 2010, it would have been then 100. In 2012, it is 104, and the previous year would have been 100. In 2014, we had a decrease from 100 to 98.3, so minus 1.7%. With this index, you can very easily, of course, see immediately the volume growth rate, which is then for 2011, 2.5%, 4.1% for 2012, and so on. These growth rates can now be used to calculate a chain-linked volume index. And I've set here in 2010, I have set the index to 100. Then applying the change rates, 2.5%, 4.1%, and so on, each time chain linked, so on the respective index before, then we get these time series of the chain linked volumes 100, 102, 106, 107, and so on. In the last column, I have done now a test calculation for you, and you can do this maybe in Excel at home yourself. Then you can calculate the growth rates of the chain linked index in percent, and there you will see, yes, what I've done is correct. In fact, the growth rates of this chain linked index are, of course, identical to the ones we had before. With the chain linked volume index and the change rate of this index, of course, you can calculate also a volume time series. Here I set in 2010 the volume to 5,000. And then applying the chain linked volume index and the change rates there gives us this time series here. I plotted this also in the two graphs below. The left graph shows you the chain linked volume index, where 2010 is 100. And with the right scale on the right side, the volume in billions of euros. And you see that they evolve exactly identical. The right graph gives you then again, the volume time series with the right scale in billion of euros and the growth rate of chain linked index on the with the left scale, which is the darker blue. What is important here is that the base period is always the previous year. Yes, that's the way we calculated it. But we can, of course, set a reference period fixed at 2010. That's why we can then calculate, plot, and also interpret, because we are interested then in growth rates of GDP or another aggregate. There we can set the reference year to a certain year. And this brings us back to where we started in the beginning. You remember that these are data at previous year's prices linked with appropriate growth rate. This is exactly what we did. Data previous year's prices, because the base period is always the previous year, and they were linked with appropriate growth rate. And that's the way we come to these growth rates of, for example, GDP or whatever aggregate we are. You can apply this to all kinds of aggregates, of course, the aggregates you have here. Okay, so you have understood where we started from in the beginning. Now we come a bit to practice how to calculate volumes. So the methods for estimate volumes. There are different methods. The first is deflation. I already explained to you that you divide by price index, and this is the deflation. There's also the input method and the output method, and I'll come to these three now. So deflation is used for market output. This is by far the dominant method for calculating a volume of GDP or other aggregates. There you have to use specific and suitable price indices, of course, to get correct result. You must also take into account quality changes. And this is done, of course, in price statistics, or at least must say price statistics aim at taking into account these quality changes. The price indices you can use here are consumer price indices or harmonized indices, consumer price producer price indices, PPIs, the service producer price indices, SPPIs, export price indices or import price indices, indices for construction works, price indices for construction works, and so on and so on. This should be done, this deflation of products in nominal terms should be done at the most detailed level, because all the price indices we have are last pair price indices. But when we do this at the most detailed level, this can approximate the partial price indices. You remember that initially the formula was that the value index should be divided by the partial price index. So when we do this at the most detailed level, it is possible then to approximate this with the last pair price index. This is something you have to believe me now, because I cannot do the proof for this here. In that way, we can use also then these price indices. And this deflation method is done for market output. You can do this also where you have market prices, of course, also for intermediate consumption, because for these products we also have market prices. You can do this for household final consumption expenditure, because you have market prices for cost fixed capital formation, for export and imports, and also other aggregates. So the dominant method, deflation. But we also have the non-market output, and there we use the input method, or have available the input methods. So for collective services, and this is in particular relevant for collective services, there we have non-market output, non-market prices. We have examples are administration, police services, defense services, and so on. Also the services of non-profit institutions serving households are non-market, and we don't have market prices available, and we must go to the output, to the input side. It's also clear to you that the output for these non-market services are measured as the sum of costs. So what we have to do here, we look at the inputs, and we must calculate then the inputs in the previous year's prices to calculate the volume. And the inputs are intermediate consumption. There we can use mostly deflation methods when we have appropriate price indices available, which is also not always the case for input goods. We have the second component of inputs is the compensation of employees. There you can use, for example, wage rate changes, which are available, and this you can apply to estimate then the volume, the wages in previous year's prices. You can also you also have to calculate the consumption of fixed capital in previous year's prices. This is inherent in the method, the perpetual inventory method, if you remember this. There you, from this method, from this technical application, you can extract then the previous year's prices estimate. What is important that all these inputs are estimated separately, so not put everything put together and deflated by something that you have available. So do it individually for each of the input categories. And you must also take care of quality changes. For example, if the qualification of your employees changes significantly, then you must take care of this when you want to calculate a volume or the inputs in previous year's prices. What is the problem with this input method is that changes in productivity are not captured. So if government increases its productivity and uses the same inputs but produces much more output, this will not be shown when we use this input method. This will not be shown in the volume estimate. So this is a disadvantage when we use the input method. Another method to be used is the output method. This can be used for individual services, which also for non-market services, but individual services, and in particular for non-market education and health services. There, this method is recommended. This should be done again in the deepest possible breakdown. For example, you break down education into kindergarten, schools, even school types, even there maybe by levels of school types. You break down tertiary education in different types of universities that you have, and even there further down into subjects, for example, because there's difference. If you study medicine or philosophy, there you have different costs involved with this. For health services, you should differentiate by types of medical treatment in hospitals, for example. This is then really done a calculation for different types each different types of medical treatment that is recorded there. You should then use output indicators and not look at the input side, but really output indicators that show you the development of your output. So one definition of the output could be the quantity of teaching received by students or pupils for each type of education. The output indicators used there could be the number of children in childcare, for example, or the number of pupils in school or students at university educated. Or if you have this available, even the hours of teaching provided to pupils or students. This would be your output indicators. For the education service, one definition could be that the output is defined as the quantity of healthcare. For the health services, the definition could be the quantity of healthcare received by patients for each type of healthcare. There, it could be the quantity indicator could then be the number of medical treatments in a very detailed breakdown for each type of medical treatment that you have, for example, in hospitals. So we have to do this in detailed breakdown. We have the output indicators, and these output indicators are then multiplied with cost weights. These are the cost per unit of output in the previous year. One difficulty of this output method is different qualities. A short word, which is maybe an interesting example, is the impact of the COVID-19 crisis that we had in healthcare. There we had new and additional medical treatments. So this means, of course, an increase in output. We will have to define a new medical treatment types. They have to be weighted with their individual costs. There are new ones, and there were massively more treatments in that respect. So we have an increase of output when we use the output indicators. When we would have used input indicators, maybe we would not have seen any change in output at all, because people are paid in hospital the same way as before. And also the inputs might have changed slightly, but not significantly, as the output method would have shown you, or has shown you. On the other hand, there was also the case in this crisis that there was a lot of waiting for treatments of COVID patients. And this would then mean there was not an output increased at that time, and this would then be measured as a decrease in output. There was also the third bullet here that other medical treatments were suspended in hospitals. And this clearly is then also a decrease in output. And in total, you could have then a mixed effect. And in some cases, even so there was this health crisis, it could be shown that, in fact, output has decreased in volume terms. In nominal terms, with higher prices and so on, it could again be a different story that you see when you look at developments. That's why it's important to have these detailed analysis. Also for education, there we can ask if the quality of this remote teaching that has been introduced now for pupils and students is the same quality or should be treated differently. Yes, these are interesting questions we have to deal with. Unfortunately, we don't have enough time to go into all these details here now. And I think that's it for the volume measures. Yes, I must explain to you also the volume of value added. If you remember the sequence of counts and so on, the value added is a balancing item. And in fact, it's not possible. There's no price for this value added. There's also no price for other balancing items or for income or saving. And for this value added, for example, the method to calculate the volume of value added is to use the double deflation. This means you calculate the volume of the output and the volume of the input, so the intermediate consumption, because the value added is, of course, output minus intermediate consumption. And then the difference of the volume series gives you the volume of value added. If this is not possible, you can also use an alternate method, which would be single deflation, which means in practice you deflate output and apply then a ratio of the normal share of intermediate consumption, and this would give you the value added in volume terms. But the recommended method is, of course, double deflation of the determinants of these balancing items where you don't have price indices and cannot do a deflation as such. Then I close this session on this part on the price and volume measures, and I come to this purchasing power parities only very shortly. So what are these purchasing power parities? These are indicators of price level differences across countries. They tell us how many currency units a given quantity of goods and services cost in different countries. An application of this is this well-known Big Mac index. You might Google for this. This is exactly what has been done there. So how much this Big Mac, which is an identical product in many countries, would cost in different countries at this purchasing power parities. PPPs, purchasing power parities, are currency converters. PPPs are used to convert values, for example, the GDP, into a common currency that neutralizes price differences or price level differences, to be precise, thereby enabling a pure volume comparison. Yeah, so with these PPPs, we can take out the price level differences between countries and then compare the volume of the aggregates that we want to look at and compare between these countries. The PPPs reflect the relative purchasing power of currencies in their national markets. And when you compare different countries, you should actually do the deflation by PPPs, the purchasing power parities, and not exchange rates, because exchange rates are influenced by many different things, while the PPPs really take out these differences in the price level. And then we can come to a comparison between countries in one same year, a meaningful comparison. So this is only the basics on the purchasing power parities. Some words on resources. What I would recommend you for reading is there's a Eurostat handbook on price and volume measures and national accounts. This first, you can download this for free, of course. This is from 2016, and there you find explanations in detail of the price and volume measures and how this is done for each individual product that you can that we have in the statistics. We have, of course, the resources in ESA 2010 and the 2008 SNA. With that, I thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed the session, and yes, looking forward for the discussion in the live session. Bye.